What's good, everybody? Episode 18 of the Slip and Weed Podcast coming right at you. Cover something. I want to follow up on something that I covered a few episodes ago. There was a fight in Germany, and essentially what happened was initially one fighter, this guy named Jackiewicz, was announced the winner by unanimous decision against a guy named Mueller in Germany. And the decision, I think from what I've read from everyone at ringside, was not a good decision. And so what had happened was the loser, Mueller, his promoter, had appealed to the BDB, which is essentially the governing body of professional boxing in Germany. And there was a panel of 5 judges, I think, that were assigned to the fight. And they all ruled in favor of the loser, Mueller. And so initially what had happened was that the result of the fight was changed from a win for Jackiewicz to a no contest. And just in looking at BoxRec, that was how I found out about it initially, was just looking through all the dates and seeing on BoxRec that this particular fight was a no contest. Anytime I see a no contest, I just want to see, like, what's the reason for this? Is it a headbutt? So what had happened was, in fact, the decision was reversed in favor of this guy, Mueller. So I think that is, I'm trying to figure out, I've been thinking about this a lot, but I'm trying to figure out if that's a good thing or a bad thing. There's goods and bads to it. I think it's definitely good anytime that there's a decision that's clearly not right or justified. There should be some sort of panel, some sort of overarching governing body that can review these kinds of things. And especially, there's been a lot of bad decisions. I talk about it on this show, how bad the fucking judging is in boxing. And so often it makes no sense. And I think that it would be smart to have a panel of judges that are not influenced by the event itself or by a crowd. Obviously, there's no crowds right now, but judging's been a problem for years and years in boxing. So this seems like it could be a good check on that. On another hand, it seems like there's potential that, on the off chance that the A side of the card gets the bad end of a close fight, that they would be able to appeal it and kind of use their popularity and financial leverage to persuade, the decision to get shifted. And I could definitely see that happening. I mean, imagine if somebody as wealthy as Floyd Mayweather, had gotten jobbed on a decision in some way, and this was available to him. Not even jobbed. Imagine if it was a legitimate 6-6 fight, and he's like, yo, fuck that. I won this thing. That could definitely get changed with someone with as much influence that generates that much revenue, that much money for so many different people, the venue, the promoters, the networks, So I could see that as potentially being dangerous. But it seems like at this level, at these kind of like mid-level contender, smaller localized fights, that this is something that could be really useful. But I thought it was worth covering because, the bad judging in boxing is consistently, I believe, something that, I'm going to just keep talking about it, it continues to hold the sport back. It continues to hold the sport back every fucking chance it can. Because there's a butterfly effect to all of these things. A guy gets a bad decision, loses that fight. If the winner of the fight, was already a big name going in, they're way more likely to trend towards a big fight, whereas the loser sort of still takes a step back, even if, the people see it a different way. And that's fucked up. That's fucked up. I think this is potentially a good check on that. And I thought it was interesting. So one of the other things I was going to talk about, and obviously bad judging is something I'll get into a little bit with this a little bit. But in 2 weeks, on the 26th, PBC is having their first pay-per-view event. And it's going to be the Charlo brothers. It's on, I believe, Showtime pay-per-view. They're both going to be fighting really top guys. Jamel, who is currently a junior middleweight champion, is fighting Jason Rosario, who is also a unified champion. He's got multiple belts that he won with a 5th round stoppage of Julian Williams. That was a real good fight, man. That was a real good fight. And Jamal, who I'm pretty sure he has a belt at middleweight, is fighting Sergey Derevyanchenko, who is 13-2, 10 knockouts, doesn't have a lot of fights, but within that record, you'll find 2 super, super competitive fights with Daniel Jacobs and with Gennady Golovkin. Razor thin, both of those fights. So he's a guy that's kind of already proven that he belongs with elite level guys. And I'm not sure that Jamal has. But before I make any predictions, let's just kind of like break these guys down a little bit if you haven't seen too much of them. They're very similar in how they fight in a lot of ways. They're very similar. And they even fought in the same division for the first chapter of their careers. If I'm not mistaken, and I could be wrong about this, Jamel is going to be the one that fights first. And he's going to be, again, he'll be fighting Jason Rosario. One of the things I've noticed about both of these guys is they stand up really tall. And so you'll see the measurements, like, for example, when Jamel fought Tony Harrison, it's listed that he's 5'11", Harrison is 6'1". In the ring, it almost looked like Charlo was taller because he stands up so straight. Harrison had more of kind of a standard boxing stance. His feet were wider apart, more kind of crouched into his stance with his chin low, whereas both of the Charlo brothers, they kind of stand up high and they're right here, which is good and bad. They both are open to get caught by quick guys. They both have good reflexes, good timing. One of the things I notice about Jamel is that he does have good defense. Even though he's kind of straight up in the air, his upper body movement's really good. It's very hard to catch him clean. The whole defense to offense thing, it's a little muddy for him. He can kind of get into like a you go, I go thing. And just, at least in the first Harrison fight, it felt like, and you can say what you want about the decision, but it felt like he spent a lot of that fight kind of following Tony. And it just wasn't very effective. But part of how he stays in fights like that is that his defense is really good. So it's hard to make an argument for the other guy that, they're doing something exceptional offensively, because they're not, But he's definitely not active enough. He's not active enough for how hard he hits and how fast he is. Both of them, but I think even in particular, Jamel against Tony Harrison, I felt like he just spent so much of the fight kind of waiting for the perfect shot. And, you get to a certain level that doesn't happen. You're not going to get the perfect shot. You have to create the perfect shot. And that's, if you looked at Tony Harrison's fight with Jarrett Hurd, part of how Jarrett Hurd got to him was that Jarrett Hurd does not wait for the perfect shot. He's just working his hands, hoping to wear you down, and that creates the perfect shot. And it's a relentless sort of attack. Neither of these guys have a particularly relentless style. They can both catch you, hurt you. They follow up real nice when they hurt you. Um, but Jamel does it. He has a really really hard time cutting off the ring against guys with good footwork, and I think against Harrison he got caught thinking that he was like, I'll out reflex him at some point, or I'll counter his counter, or he'll open himself up, he'll get tired. You can't rely on any of those things happening. You can't rely on any of those things happening. But one thing I noticed about also in the Harrison fight, that was one of the fights I watched kind of to prep talking about this, was the first Tony Harrison fight. He's a really strong finisher. He knows how to close out a fight. So does Jamal. I'll talk about one of the fights of his that I watched recently as well. But he's a really strong finisher. I think I scored it myself on BoxRec. There's a feature where you can score fights and it'll show you like the average of who's scoring the fight. I think I had it 115, 113 for Harrison, but I had Charlo winning the last 2 rounds really big. So he knows how to kind of play from behind and not let it get in his head, which is it's a good mental stamina. They both have good mental stamina as far as, even if there's periods where they're having a hard time or whatever, they're able to stay engaged in what they're doing. But this guy Rosario that he's fighting, I watched his fight with Julian Williams as well. And one of the things I noticed about him is he's just a big guy for this weight. He's just a really big, strong guy for a junior middleweight, 154 pounds. And Julian Williams is like technical boxing skills and his punch delivery and his defense and everything. He's a really slick, smart boxer. And it seemed like anytime Rosario would catch him, that it would just change the fight immediately. If he caught him clean, it changed the fight. And in the 5th round, it was just too much. He was just stronger, and he completely overwhelmed Williams in a way that I don't think a lot of people thought he could do. I mean, I didn't. I had seen both of them, and I thought this is a good stay active fight for Williams. I didn't necessarily see it as a winnable fight for Rosario because we didn't know. But now we know. Now we know just how hard he hits. Now we know that he's got good speed. He's got good power. He moves his head on the way in nice too. And he's a handful to deal with. I don't know that Jermel's ever had to fight somebody that puts that much pressure on. It's a lot of pressure, man. That's a lot of pressure coming at you, and you got to be really ready to stop and plant and really let your hands go. I don't think he's going to be able to go the pace that he likes going. Because even against Harrison, there was just stretches where he was just kind of getting out footworked. Where Harrison could go where he wanted to go and just kind of pop his jab and stay on the move. That's not the kind of fight this is going to be, I don't think. That's not Rosario's mentality. Rosario's mentality is knockout. You can see it. He's got, I'm trying to put hands on you and hurt you, and I'll take a couple to do it, but I'm not going to give them to you. So, I mean, to be honest with you, I think that Rosario is going to win this fight. I think at some point, he's going to be too much for this guy. And I could be wrong about that. But I guess that's part of the risk you take in doing predictions. But I definitely feel like, having seen Rosario in with Julian Williams, somebody of that caliber, who beat Jarrett Hurd. Keep in mind, this guy beat Jarrett Hurd, who's a very relentless pressure guy. And this guy stopped him. It's hard for me to see. I just don't feel like Jermel is active enough to deter this kid from doing what he wants to do. It may take him a while to get his hands on him because Jermel has great athleticism and defense. But offensively, I don't see how he's got the firepower to keep this kid off. The guy's 25 years old, and he's probably really feeling himself after that last fight. You know what I mean? So I'm going to go with Rosario by mid to late round stoppage. We'll see if that's actually what happens, but I think that, to be honest with you, and I've seen both of these guys fight a lot, but I think with Jermel, there's so much I don't know There's a handful of top guys that they've each fought. But there's a lot of questions with them. I don't think really for real either of them have fought at the absolute elite level of the sport. And now he's fighting somebody that beat somebody at the elite level of the sport. And I think it's a true 50-50 fight, and he's probably not used to that. He's probably used to being the favorite every time he gets in the ring. He's probably going to be the favorite on this one. But, yeah, Rosario by late stoppage. So Jermall Charlo, I watched his fight. I watched a couple of different things, but I watched his fight with Matt Korobov, which was on the same card as Jermell's loss to Tony Harrison, his only loss. Jermall is undefeated. Jermall is 30-0, 22 knockouts, and he's one weight division higher at middleweight, 160 pounds. One of the things that I noticed about the Korobov fight is that he definitely didn't win it. He definitely didn't win this fight. And part of how I know that is because I scored it pretty closely. I had it 7-5 Korobov. I looked on BoxRec, the average. My score was 115, 113, and when they did the average, it was 116, 114 for Korobov. That was the average score. One of the judges had it 119, 108 for Charlo. The other two had it 116, 112 for Charlo. That would essentially be 11 rounds to 1 and 8 rounds to 4. I scored it 7 rounds to 5 for the other guy. So, on one level, this is part of what I want to get into with the bad judging, right? If that fight gets judged correctly, I don't know if this kind of card happens. You know, maybe he gets a rematch with Korobov same way that Jermell gets a rematch with Tony, stops him. But, I mean, this fight, to me, the first 5 rounds, Korobov gives him a complete boxing lesson. Complete boxing lesson. You get into the 6th round, you know, Korobov hasn't been real active. He's 35. But he's super athletic. But, you know, the 6th round, I would say, starting in the 6th round, he starts slowing down a little bit. And Jermell sort of outworks him. By the end of the fight, he's coming on real strong. But to me, it was way too little, way too late. And, you know, the scorecard guy for PBC was giving it to Charlo. And one of the things that's interesting about when they fight is I noticed that the Fox guys or whatever network they're on, it's usually Fox. It's very narrative-based broadcasting. They have a certain idea of what the fight is going to be, and they spend the duration of the fight sort of rationalizing how you're seeing that or why we're not seeing that or we should be, but it feels like a lot of times when these guys are on that they're not watching the fight. You could see it with the Harrison fight. You know, even if you thought Charlo won, you had to know it was close. You had to know that these long stretches where he's not letting his hands go and just sort of moving away from jabs and taking body shots, like he was not busy in that fight. And they kept portraying this fight where he was like this attacker and Harrison's on the run, and I was like, I don't know what the fuck you're watching. And then when it would get kind of boring and Harrison would just be on the move, pop, pop, you know, popping his jab, moving his head, boxing, you know, they would say Harrison's not going to like win this fight just boxing. And I was like, what the fuck are you talking about? Like, that's how a lot of guys win fights. You know, it's hit and don't get hit. What are you talking about? So with this fight, it was interesting because the announcers could tell that Korobov was really getting to Charlo. Maybe even more than the unofficial scorecard guy. Because they kept talking about how close it is. Jermall's got to, you know, distinguish himself in these rounds a little bit. And it was all framed around what Jermall is or isn't doing and not the fight itself. And the fight itself, what was happening was he was getting cracked with left hands the first half of the fight anytime Korobov let it go. Just getting cracked with it. I mean, head snap back, cracked with left hands. And not really able to put hands on the guy. Granted, he, like his brother, is a very strong finisher. So towards the end of the fight, he starts to get to Korobov a little bit. But it takes him forever to get going. And, he's got all that power, all that speed, and it's like, what are you waiting on? Like, what are you waiting for? An invitation to let your hands go? Because again, it's like they're talented enough where they should kind of know these things. I think that somebody like Korobov, who was so inactive, again, great skills from that, Russian amateur program, top level guy. But somebody that inactive that and that you could see faded the second half of the fight, you got to be able to put somebody like that away. Even if their skills give you some problems for a bit, as an elite level guy, you have to stop somebody like that. And he didn't. He didn't even really come close. He kind of buzzed them a little bit at the end, but he never really got close. And he definitely didn't win the fight. So, and I think that arguably Korobov is the best fighter that he fought in his career so far. Derevyanchenko, we don't know if this is the best fighter he's ever fought, but what we do know is that when he fought two of the best middleweights of the era, that he was within a point or two each time. Danny Jacobs and Golovkin. This is a top level guy. And he knows how to put pressure on. He's got good hand speed. He's got good power. He's got the whole package. And I'm guessing, is kind of like chomping at the bit here a little bit. Like, this is my fucking moment right here. Like, I've gotten these two chances. He's probably learned a lot from each of them. And you can see, if you watch the Derevyanchenko and Golovkin fight, I thought Golovkin just edged it, barely. And maybe just with the knockdown. But this guy has elite level skills, 100%. And I think that his mentality and his stamina and his ability to stick with a game plan at that level, he's already proven he can do that. He hasn't necessarily proven that he can win, but he's proven that he can sort of keep a 50-50 with the very best in the division. And just based on the Korobov fight, based on the Austin Trout fight where he didn't really let his hands go like that, I'm going with Derevyanchenko by decision. I'm predicting that both of these guys are going to lose. That could definitely come back and bite me in the ass, and I could be totally wrong about that. And at that point, I think they'll probably have proven that they are elite. But I don't think this is going to be the fight where they prove that, because they're not particularly active either. They don't fight enough, in my opinion. And part of that is some of this PBC shit. They got different promoters. If you're in a certain weight class with a certain promoter, sometimes it's hard to stay active. And I think Al Heyman, he's got a weird sense of timing out when a fight is good and relevant, and he's not just going to rush guys in with each other. There's been this slow boil this last 5 years, and then, every once in a while you get a Thurman Porter, or you get a Porter Garcia, or, where you get two guys. You get Spence Porter. Oh, notice Sean Porter seems to be the common denominator. I tell you what, fucking Vintage Seltzer should fucking sponsor me. I do think that both of these guys are going to lose. I do. And I think ultimately the reason I think they're going to lose is because when I've seen them against their best opponents who are just under elite is when they start looking a little limited. I think there's a lot of guys that can look really good and explosive at a certain level. And then you put them at a different level, at a different kind of depth, and they get a little lost. And sometimes I think that these guys look like that. And I don't think that they can do that against the opponents they're in with. I think it's the first time they're really in with some real ones. And if they can stand up to that, they're real too. And they may both be in great classic fights that they lose, which I would also, have a huge amount of respect for that, for sure. And I think that's going to be a good card. I definitely, if you love boxing and, you're looking to help the sport continue and thrive, I think this is a good card to get in on. And I'm excited for it. So this last Saturday also, there was an ESPN card. There was basically two fights of that mattered. There was some good prospects as always. I mentioned this. I try to talk about some of the young talent each week, but there's so much of it. And there was probably 8 fights on this card, 9 fights. It was like 7 hours of boxing. The co-main event was Joet Gonzalez against Miguel Mariaga at featherweight. And Gonzalez won by a unanimous decision. You may have seen Gonzalez lose to Shakur Stevenson. And I mean, I wouldn't take too much away from that because Shakur Stevenson is an incredible talent, like potentially a pound-for-pound level talent. So it's hard to gauge somebody else's talent just next to that. This guy Gonzalez can fucking fight, man, because Mariaga's been in there with the best of the best. And if you watch Mariaga when he throws combinations, you could see how experienced he is, man. He's got that educated front hand where he'll throw like 4 or 5 shots with the same hand. That's like very confusing because he places them in all these weird different spots. But Gonzalez just fucking kept that pressure up the whole, I think it was a 10-round fight. Yeah, it was a 10-round fight. He kept that pressure up the whole 10 and really kind of overwhelmed Mariaga by the 4th or 5th round. And it was like Mariaga would get off his combinations and he would land some shots, and it didn't have any effect. Gonzalez was too young, too hungry, and too explosive, and really good at cutting off the ring, really good at being able to move to the side and make it seem like, Mariaga's got nowhere to go. So at featherweight, I mean, I think he's a tough out. It's hard to know a little bit just because Mariaga, as much as he's fought top level guys, he's never beaten one. So, but he's beaten everyone else he's fought. So clearly Gonzalez is either elite or he's definitely a strong contender at featherweight. The main event was Egidijus Kavaliauskas. Can you believe I got that fucking name right? Come on, son. Egidijus Kavaliauskas stopping Mikhail Zuski in the 8th round. This is a fun fight, man. This is a very high-level shit. If you can watch this one, I would watch it because, 2 very high-level operators, pretty good with the defense. Ultimately, Kavaliauskas was just too strong. The stoppage was also horrible. He hurt him, I think, in the 7th, and then they came out in the 8th. He landed a couple of good ones and put Zuski down quickly, and the ref just waved it off immediately, which it seemed like he deserved a count. It didn't seem like he was, I mean, I don't know. I just felt like it was early. I think in those kind of situations where, even though the guy's hurt, if it's kind of a flash knockdown or he doesn't look like he's out cold or helpless, like, obviously we want to always protect the fighter's health, always. But this seemed early. But it was a great fight. It was a really top-level welterweight fight. I'm not really sure where this guy, Kavaliauskas, fits into welterweight, particularly as a top-ranked fighter. But at the end of the fight, he called out Terence Crawford for a rematch. And unfortunately, I feel like that could happen. And it's not unfortunate because Kavaliauskas isn't a good fighter, but it is unfortunate that there's all of these incredible welterweights. There's probably 10 of them right now that are ahead of this guy, and they're all beasts. And he can't seem to get in the ring with any of them. I know he's got maybe a fight scheduled with Kell Brook. If that's not for real scheduled, they need to make that happen. Because this is a guy who's getting to be in his mid-30s now. He's working towards it. And there's really, he's been regarded as a pound-for-pound guy for years. The best win he's got is against Victor Postol. That's the best win he's got. I like Postol. He's a very skilled guy. I talked about the other episode, 2-3 episodes ago, about how I thought he beat Ramirez. But that's his best win as the welterweight champion of the world, as a junior welterweight top 10 contender. And there's a lot of reasons for that. There's his promoter, him being in a different promoter than a lot of these other PBC guys. You know, the PBC guys don't have to fight him because there's, you know, they can make top level fights just within their realm, within their stable. You know, and now they do rankings of, they'll say PBC welterweights, where they're only ranking guys from, and it's basically every top welterweight that's not Terence Crawford. And I think it sucks because all of these promoters, you know, I'm glad that these guys get paid, but it is making it so that their careers, I mean, now Crawford is deep into his career, and not a whole lot has changed on this front, on the competition he fights. You know, and guys will go whole careers and only have a handful of big fights, you know, unless you're in the right promotional setting where you can round robin fight each other, like these PBCs at welterweight, you know, welterweight and junior middleweight. And I think that whatever Terence Crawford does in the post-pandemic boxing scene, I feel like he's got to make it a priority to only fight top-level guys. And whatever's getting in the way of that, I really think he should just fucking get rid of it, because it's not helping him anymore. Maybe at one time it helped him. It helped him develop a platform. It helped him get some belts and some accolades. But when you talk about the pound-for-pound best fighters in the world, dude, I mean, on my pound-for-pound list, I got him 4th, and he's got the worst resume of anybody in the top 10. And I literally have him 4th because his skills are crazy. But whatever, I think whatever is holding him back from fighting his contemporaries, he has to let that go, because it's going to fuck his legacy up. It's going to really limit his legacy. You know, there's no way you can compare him to the Mayweathers and the Pacquiaos and the Cottos, where they fought most of their contemporaries. They fought the other great fighters of their era. Sugar Ray Leonard, Hagler, Hearns, Duran. You know, in that time it was De La Hoya, Mayweather, Pacquiao, Cotto. All these guys fought against each other. You know, these guys all made their legacy against each other. And Terence Crawford hasn't really done any of that. He's sort of had his career out on an island. And so it is tough to compare him to the other top welterweights. You know, there's a part of me that's like, I don't even know how. There's some times where I feel like I don't know how you put this guy at the top of the pound for pound list when there's not really one opponent that he's fought that's in the top 10 of his division. So, and I'm a big fan. It sucks. I would love to see Crawford in against somebody that is relevant, to see just how great he is, and hopefully they can put this fucking Kell Brook fight together, and we can see that. We can see that happen. So, yeah, that's episode 18 of the Slip and Weave podcast, you guys. Thanks for tuning in again, and I'll see you next week. Peace.